Hi, you're listening to Stephan Livera podcast, a show about Bitcoin and Austrian economics brought to you by swan.com. Today, we're talking about splicing and the potential benefits of splicing for the Lightning Network with my guest, Dusty Daemon. With Bitcoin, it's not your keys, not your coins, and CoinKite.com are making it easy for us to use hardware devices to secure our coins. So they notably have the Tap Signer, which is a low-cost, cheaper device that you can use with NFC, and they also have the Cold Card Mark IV. The Cold Card is a phenomenal device. It has so many different settings and ways you can use it. I particularly like using multi-signature as part of my setup, and with the Cold Card, it even registers the multi-signature quorum of the other devices, meaning it has the public keys of the other devices. This is great because it helps you verify the public keys that are involved in your multi-signature. So if you're interested in this or any other gear such as the block clock or the seed plate, go to CoinKite.com and use code Livera for a discount on your cold cards. Pacific Bitcoin is coming back this year. It's being organized by the team at Swan Bitcoin. It's going to be in LA October 5th and 6th. So make sure you check your calendars, check your diaries, make sure you mark this down and look at flights and hotels. It is going to be a fantastic event. The feedback on the event last year was incredible. People were saying it was the best conference they had been to. They were saying if there was only one Bitcoin event they would go to, this would be it. Pacific Bitcoin is coming back and there are initial speakers, Lynn Alden, Greg Foss, Preston Pish, Corey Clipston, Alex Gladstein, and so many more to come who are yet to be announced. And I'm really looking forward to this. Of course, I'll be there speaking and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. You will find a range of content there, whether that's the stuff on the main stage or some more intimate stages and smaller stages with other content that you can find. It's going to be an experience. It's not just a conference. It's actually going to be a festival celebrating Bitcoin. So make sure you check it out. Book it into your calendars, October 5th and 6th. Go to pacificbitcoin.com. Use code Livera. Get your tickets now for you and a friend before the prices go up. And now onto the show with Dusty. Dusty, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm a fan of what you're doing with splicing, and obviously it's been great to see you over the years, kind of in and around the Bitcoin and Lightning circles. And yeah, I love what you're doing with splicing. So let's hear a little bit about you, just for people who don't know you, just a little bit on you.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm Dusty Daemon. That's what I go by now. It's my fake name. No one can guess my real name. You know, it's too difficult. Oh, that's a joke. But anyway, I've been into Bitcoin for a long time now. And, I think I've reached the point where I'm long past being convinced about Bitcoin. And I've reached the point where I want to give back to Bitcoin a bunch of years ago. And I was sort of exploring what the best way to do that was and looking at what skills I do have and experience and how I could best contribute. And I ended up settling on working on Lightning, which I knew was going to be hard going into, but it's even harder than I thought it would be. It's like, what's that saying? Lightning is all of the parts of Bitcoin you don't understand, plus a bunch of new things you also don't understand. But it's been a delightful journey, and I've just I'm almost coming up on almost 2 years of working on Lightning stuff. So I've kind of become like a Lightning developer, which is very exciting for me. I couldn't be happier in this sort of position.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I recall when I first met you, you were kind of interested in hardware wallets and hardware stuff, but then you kind of shifted over. But anyway, let's talk a bit about splicing. Well, what is splicing?
So at its core, splicing is a very simple concept. It's the ability to resize a Lightning channel. But what's become clear over time is that leads to a lot of other awesome possibilities that weren't possible before. And I think the shortest way to summarize it is that we had before Lightning, we had just Bitcoin, and Lightning gave us Bitcoin on Lightning, and they're kind of separate concepts. And splicing really ties them together. And a way of saying that is it brings fungibility from regular Bitcoin and Lightning Bitcoin. And that fungibility element enables all kinds of crazy, awesome things that I think even when we were first speccing out splicing, people weren't aware of. And it's pretty awesome.
Gotcha. Yeah. So maybe one easy way to understand it that I think of is, let's say we have already existing channels in Lightning. We can use splicing to resize those channels up or down. Fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a common misconception we run into is people tend to learn channel in this order. Lightning exists, that's cool. Eventually, I have to have a channel. What's a channel? They learn that eventually. And then eventually learn about channel balances. And a lot of people kind of don't go past that and separate the idea of a channel balance from the capacity of the channel. And importantly, splicing affects the capacity of the channel, and not the balance directly, although maybe indirectly.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. And so I guess just for the layman out there, we're going to try to keep this accessible and then maybe get more technical into it later on. But the basic, I mean, for people who just want to use Lightning, of course, there are easy apps that deal with all the complexity. You don't need to deal with it. You know, it's in the background. They manage the channels for you, like, let's say, like Breeze or Phoenix or things like this. But we're talking here a little bit just more, what are the benefits of this idea and what does it enable for us in the ecosystem, right? So this idea that you could resize channels instead of having to close and reopen. Why is that a good thing? Why would that be beneficial?
It's a great question. And there's two different people that benefit. One is the consumer side and the other one is the backend side. It's probably easier to talk about the consumer side. Phoenix is a great example. When you use Phoenix and you use Lightning, it just sort of works in the background. You don't have to think about any of this. But in the background, the app is opening. Every time you need new capacity, it's figuring out when to open new channels. And so if somebody uses Phoenix Wallet regularly, if you look in the deep technical settings, you'll find they might have like 7 or 12 different channels operating off of your one wallet. And what that means essentially is just more costs. Like if you have 7 channels, you're using you're essentially using 7x the block space for that, and you're paying for that. So for a consumer, what you're going to notice is just more wallets existing that work for cheaper. Like the fees for running these Lightning wallets is just going to go down. And I think it's a pretty substantial amount because these are on-chain fees. And that's the big thing. The other thing is like there's not a lot of apps that have a unified Lightning and on-chain balance. And I think this is a confusion for a lot of new users. They're like, okay, welcome to Bitcoin. Do you want Lightning or on-chain? And they're like, I don't know what any of those words mean. And I think this ends up being a hurdle for new users. With splicing, it makes it possible to build apps that have a unified balance, which is like, welcome to Bitcoin. You don't have to know this, but we support Lightning and on-chain, interchangeably because we've created fungibility there. And so even more disappears from the new user's experience and it just works more regularly in general.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I think today there are apps such as Moon Wallet, spelled MUUN, but we can think of Moon Wallet, it's in some way, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but you can think of it almost like it's natively an on-chain wallet that can pay or receive Lightning, but really Moon's server or LSP is kind of doing the sending and receiving for you. But then on the contrast, as you said, something like Phoenix or Breeze, they have a unified balance, right? There's no on-chain or off-chain or less of a concept of that, but it's natively on Lightning. And so I think maybe one way to think about it is with splicing, if that's a widely accepted concept, or let's say a lot of wallets use that concept, this allows them to, let's say, be natively Lightning and then going to chain, let's say, using an on-chain Bitcoin transaction, maybe that's the exceptional case, whereas actually most of the time we're trying to stay on Lightning, either receiving or sending.
100%. And I mean, the whole point, the main point of Lightning is that on-chain is expensive. So if you're natively on Lightning where it's cheaper and go to on-chain when needed, you're paying the minimal fees possible. And we notice this, especially lately with fees getting so high with the whole inscription stuff, like mempool costs are suddenly a big deal. And I imagine a lot of the MUUN Moon Wallet users are probably feeling that punch with the on-chain fees being so high. And like, if you have to pay an on-chain fee, as I understand Moon Wallet to work, every transaction, you're losing almost all the benefits of Lightning, and flipping it around is, like you said, exactly. Yeah. Way better. It's how it should be done, essentially. Yeah.
And I mean, in fairness to the Moon guys, I know they are also looking at stuff like some of this stuff, of how they could potentially move to a Lightning native model. But yeah, I mean, 100%. I think it's just an educational thing that the space is going through. And I think obviously there are detractors and people who don't like Lightning, but I think longer term, fees are going to rise. I think there will be a persistent backlog of transactions that are hitting Bitcoin's mempool or the mempools out there in the nodes, because every node has their own mempool. And so eventually fees are going to rise. And so we need ways to be more efficient. And I think Lightning is a way to be more efficient because we're kind of batching and taking, in a sense, we're taking transactions off the chain. And I guess that's the concept of off-chain scaling. And so splicing, it can be understood like one tool in the overall toolbox, correct? Like that there are multiple tools
100%.
that you or the business can use or the wallet can use to manage the Lightning stuff in the background. So again, for users, you don't have to worry. Like end users, you don't really need to worry. This stuff is all in the background. But this is for people who are interested to understand a little bit and trying to understand some of the concepts, and maybe for some of the builders and developers in the space who want to get up to speed on this stuff as well. So that's how I'm seeing it. And so I guess we can talk a little bit about some of the benefits there, that maybe there might even be a privacy benefit also. So I'm curious if you could spell out your thoughts there. Why could splicing help from a privacy perspective?
100%. And this is one of those, like, splicing starts out as a simple concept. You can resize channels. And along the way, you're like, wait, how do we solve privacy at the same time? And it's kind of like the gift that keeps giving. Not that it solves privacy. It's never a completely solved place, but, so part of the splicing protocol has this inherent coin join like thing in it. It's been called like interactive TX. It's used in some other parts of new Lightning proposals as well. And that's good because it makes them interoperable. And what this essentially does is it allows you to combine multiple actions together into one. So you can do like 2 splices in one transaction or 3, or you could open a channel, or in theory, in the long run, close a channel all in a single transaction. And this unifies them together. But what's crazy is what's also coming down the pipe is Taproot Lightning channels. And for those that haven't been following that, Taproot Lightning channels look the same on chain as a regular Bitcoin transaction. And this is a huge change. Before, like today, going into the past, you can see a Lightning channel on chain pretty effectively. You can tell this is probably a Lightning channel, especially whenever they close the channel, it's clear in hindsight. It's generally clear on chain this is a Lightning channel. But with Taproot, we're able to actually hide the channels on chain, which is kind of crazy. And the other thing is the cost has been equalized. So in the past, if you want to do a complex Bitcoin script on chain, it costs more to do it. Now in the happy path for Lightning, it costs exactly the same. So anyway, all this means is that you can do if you want to do like a payment from your Lightning channel using splicing on Taproot, it's indistinguishable from everything else on chain, and it costs the same as doing a regular payment. So like you could see a future where like nobody is storing their funds on chain. They're always stored Lightning channels, and then all on chain payments come out of them and they all look the same, right? So you end up with a whole host of like coin join, like privacy stuff.
Yeah. So let me explain a little bit on the privacy aspect. So today, it's possible to do what's known as chain surveillance, or maybe some call it chain analysis. There's a company called Chainalysis as an example, but the point being they use certain heuristics, and there's probably 2 key ones I'm thinking of here. One is known as the common input ownership heuristic, and the other one is known as the change heuristic. And so I guess I'm going to take a second to just kind of roughly explain it, and then hopefully you can comment on that as well. But the idea is when we go to do a Bitcoin transaction, our wallet is actually doing coin selection. It's kind of going, which UTXO am I going to spend from? And so some of these heuristics kind of use this idea to say, well, if 2 UTXOs are being spent in the same transaction, there's a good chance that it's the same person doing that. And so some of these chain surveillance firms use that heuristic, and just, people in general can use that heuristic to try to understand who's the sender, who's the receiver, and try to sort of track the flows. That's one main heuristic that is being used. Another one is known as the change heuristic, right? So if you have a transaction with multiple pieces of UTXOs, that's a piece of Bitcoin, unspent transaction output, and you can use the change heuristic to try to understand which one is the payment, which one is the change. And so I think the way I'm seeing it, splicing is helping take away those heuristics, or at least undermine those heuristics. So it's not a coin join per se, but it's undermining those heuristics that are commonly used in chain surveillance, let's say. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the first one, the common inputs, that is solved by getting more people to coin join, right? This is more of like a game theory group action sort of thing. And I think that the key to getting everyone to doing that is to make it cheaper to do so. Like right now, if you want to coin join all your payments, you have to pay quite a bit to do that. And I think that's a deterrent. People have their own political reasons whether they might like coin joins or not, but there's also just the pure cost. And if splicing can bring coin joins or coin join like stuff to be the same costs, now you get people on the fence to move over. And if we can get it cheaper than regular transactions, then we'll probably get a whole host of people that just don't even care about privacy at all. They just want to save money. And now they're contributing to the common input heuristic being destroyed, which is delightful. On the change front, Waxwing has been working on this, which is some wild stuff, is that part of the problem with coin joins is you have this toxic change you have to manage in general. And the thing about splicing is we have a lightning channel there. You can just dump the change into the channel directly and you get rid of all change needs entirely. Like just put it all into one sort of pile. And this is like theoretical stuff, but it sure sounds like that's going to like upend our entire approach to coin joins, because getting rid of the change problems is a huge deal. Now that's all theoretical work. You know, Waxwing is doing amazing stuff on that. But I think splicing has the potential, especially with Taproot and splicing together, like this happy marriage, to reshape the entire privacy landscape and maybe put us forward a whole long way.
Yeah, gotcha. So I guess in fairness, like I want to put it in context here, because today, right, Lightning is pretty small compared to Bitcoin on chain, let's say. I think it's fair to say, right? Like the amount of Bitcoin in public channels is something like maybe 5,500 BTC. Out of it today, something like 19.4 million BTC. But we could see a future where it grows and there's lots of Lightning users. And if all these Lightning users are using splicing when they're, let's say they're opening and closing channels together, or they're doing these channel operations to resize their channels, and splicing is at play there, there's collaborative transactions at play there, it becomes more difficult to sort of understand just from an outsider looking on chain to see, I know what's happening there because of these heuristics, because splicing undermines those heuristics.
Totally. And, you don't even have to be using Lightning to be joining these, right? Like, right now, the coin join, you have to find a coordinator that coordinates the coin join. With Lightning, every Lightning node is itself a coordinator, right? So, like, if you just know somebody with a Lightning node, or you use a service that has a Lightning node, you can join already active splices, which is sort of a technical nuance I won't go too deep into, but the idea is that if I'm doing a splice, I can combine it with my channel peers' splices, and they combine it with their channel peers' splices. So we get this kind of like possibility of this long chain of things. And if any one of those nodes along the way wants to offer a service to their friends or people that pay or whatever, they can add them into it. So the idea is, even if Lightning stays small forever, there still is some coin joining type benefit that's possible, right? We could be merging in that way.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say having more collaborative transactions where it's not clear who owns what. From the outside, it's not clear who owns what, right? So let's say you and I are doing a splicing. From an outside observer, maybe there's less that they can glean just from looking on chain, all right? It's less clear. So maybe that's an interesting benefit that we will see with splicing, and I think the ability to do multiple operations with one splice is like we were joking about this in person. I think the last time we were catching up, I was calling you the fruit ninja of Lightning, because you with one splice I can So the fruit ninja of Lightning is out here to teach everyone about splicing. But as an example, let's say you are a Lightning user and you've got multiple channels. I guess it's possible to do multiple operations with one on-chain transaction in splicing, right?
Yes. And I think, like, long run, I think every Lightning node should be doing that. There's some more engineering work for that, but like, I think we have this idea of Bitcoin transactions as like, I create it happens, I publish it, it's done. But in the future, I think we're going to move to like, hey, I want to get these goals done with my money over this time span. Like, okay, this one could be in a month, this one a year, this one has to be today, right? You take those priorities and you can start merging them together into multiple collaborative transactions to get like less on-chain footprint in general. And along the way, you get privacy. It's like, come for the cheap fees, get privacy. It's sort of like I think what ends up happening.
Yeah, that's cool to see. So we could see a future there where maybe, there's just more collaborative transactions. But I mean, then there would need to be some coordinating efforts there. But these are presumably Lightning nodes, so they're already online, and it's a bit easier for them to already talk to each other because they're already talking to each other on the peer-to-peer network of Lightning.
Exactly.
So there's kind of more work required, but I guess there's a possibility there. So that could be really cool. And so we've spoken a little bit about from the user perspective. and lightly spoken about it from the provider, the back end, the LSP, the wallet provider perspective. So do you want to just go into that a little bit? What kind of benefits will they see on their side?
There's a couple, but the biggest one is, first, at high level, it's adding another tool to their toolkit. And the big Lightning service providers, or the big just Lightning routing nodes, they need every tool they can get. They're constantly in this sort of pinch. And I think the easiest example is if you look at, say, like Lightning channels into El Salvador. My understanding is there's a lot of remittance from the U.S. into El Salvador, and that's one directional flow of funds. And the nature of Lightning channels means all those channels get unbalanced all the time. So like the more remittances go through, the more you look at a company like Gala or something that has a lot of these. They have to constantly move that balance back. They got to find a way to move the liquidity over. And, you want to start with things like circular balance or whatever. But adding another toolkit can like save them night and day. And splicing allows you to, if you have funds in one channel that you can't move across the Lightning network because it's kind of pinned by all this flood of funds coming from the US and El Salvador, you can just say, okay, I'm going to sidestep that, move those funds on chain over to a channel in the US where I have more remittances coming to service. And it's kind of like, you kind of get to cheat the system, you go like dig a tunnel, all right, go through the fourth dimension or something, get the funds over.
Well, it's like a submarine swap sort of concept, or even kind of like a loop out concept, right? The idea is, another example might be you're a merchant and you've got all these channels, but all the balance is on your side because maybe you're a very successful merchant, you've made all these sales, and now you're like, well, I need new capacity. I need a way to kind of shunt it back, right? So there'll be ways to sort of use these different tools, whether that's using a provider like Lightning Loop server or bolts.exchange, or using splicing where you can do it for yourself in certain contexts, in a certain way. So I guess you've got different tools, right? Yeah, circular rebalance, use a provider, do a splice operation. I guess these are some of the different techniques that are available to you.
Yeah, and any like big operator that's successful is going to have a system that uses all of them. Probably like an automated software suite that has every single option available and just chooses the cheapest one for a given moment. And I think splicing fills a big gap in there where there's like a big need for ability to do kind of things that just either get really expensive or you can't do them at all. And splicing makes those a lot cheaper.
Gotcha. And so from a LSP, service provider, wallet user, Lightning node routing perspective, they are getting capital efficiency improvements. So as you mentioned, this idea, so let's say you are async and you've got all these Phoenix wallet users who have, let's say, 7 channels. That means 7 UTXOs, right? And we know longer term, that's, not really going to scale easily. Whereas if they can splice, you can sort of get closer to this idea of one user has one UTXO, and splicing is how you kind of go in and out rather than having a lot of, let's say, unused capacity, right?
100%. And the dead liquidity thing reminds me of another good point for the big guys is that they constantly today have to keep a supply of on-chain funds that's just sitting there waiting. It can't be in a Lightning channel because they might need to open new channels to solve capacity demand problems over time. Splicing allows you to keep those funds in a channel and then move them out at the last minute to where you need it. And this means like for an institution, if you got to keep like, I don't know, pick a number, 100 Bitcoin in dead liquidity just laying there, that's dead liquidity. With splicing, you remove the need for all of it. You can put all the funds in Lightning channels. If the channel's not performing well, that's fine. Just put it on your first to kill list when you want to splice funds out of it into where you need it, right? And I think that's a big change as well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it gives you a benefit there. And so the end user might be like, hey, screw the providers. I don't care about cheaper for them. But here's the thing. If it's cheaper for providers, then they will compete with each other, and then the user might get a cheaper fee out of it at the end of it. So even the 100%. End user who's listening might be thinking, screw them. I don't care about them. I just want my thing. Well, actually, this might help them provide you a cheaper service as an end user. So it might bring the cost down. And if you are fundamentally bullish on Bitcoin adoption, and you think that there's going to be big fee spikes coming, that, even this recent round where people were paying 500 sats per VByte, whether that's $50 on chain or $100 on chain per transaction, then having more tools that help reduce this or help do batching operations is how the costs can be kept managed in smart technical engineering ways, right?
Totally. And I think you go back over the last, 5 years ago, people weren't really worried about on-chain fees. They're like, whatever, it's one sat VByte forever. Don't forever, Laura. And I think what we're noticing is actually people are starting to wake up a little bit. Like, oh wait, we won't have one sat forever. Maybe we should prepare for that future. And I think things like splicing are tools we're going to need for that future. I think the days of not having to worry about on-chain fees will end at some point and potentially quite soon.
Yeah, interesting. And so I think it'll also make it more feasible for more people to be self-custodial, potentially, right? Because if it weren't for that, then there might be more people who are priced out, let's say. Like, if it weren't for more efficient solutions, more people would just get priced out of being on-chain sovereign users, and they're kind of pushed off into being custodial users. Whereas in this future, maybe there's more people who can be self-custodial. So maybe that's another way to sort of come at this.
Totally. Like, the more efficient we are with block space, the more people we can get on, Yeah. And the mechanism for that is you see the prices the costs be lower, but it's sort of the same point, right? They both end up in the same sort of results.
Back to the show in a moment. Mempool.space is my preferred block explorer, and I use it every time before I'm about to send a sizable Bitcoin on-chain transaction. It helps me target my fee depending on whether I want that to go through at a medium priority rate or at a high priority rate. You can see the fee rates that are put there on mempool.space. Mempool.space shows you multiple aspects of the Bitcoin ecosystem, from mempools to the blockchain to second layer networks like the Lightning Network. You can also use it as a transaction visualizer. So for example, if somebody sends a transaction to you and they send you a TX ID, you can go and search that over on mempool.space. Of course, I'm excited for their new feature coming. I'm waiting for more information on this, but it's called the Transaction Accelerator, which you might have seen Wiz announce recently. So go and find out more over at mempool.space. And lastly, Plan B Forum in Lugano is coming up. So for those of you who don't know, Lugano is a city in Switzerland, and they are taking on Bitcoin adoption. There are literally hundreds of places that you can go and spend sats over the Lightning Network. So this is going to be an amazing event for anyone in or near Europe. Lugano is a beautiful city, and I'm really looking forward to going there. Now, we know they've already announced a range of awesome speakers like Nick Szabo, Adam Back, Paolo Arduino, Prince Philip, Giacomo Zucco, and Mike Peterson from Bitcoin Beach. There's going to be a range of stages. There'll be a main stage and also a Lightning and peer-to-peer stage. They are also going to have masterclasses where Bitcoiners can learn skills relating to self-custody or multi-sig or setting up your Lightning node. And just like last year, they are going to have an art gallery. So just remember, the dates for this are October 20th and 21st. Make sure you check that in your diaries and your calendars. Look up flights and hotels. For some people, it may be handy to fly in via Milan and then get a transfer over from Milan over to Lugano. But you can find out more at planb.lugano.ch. And now back to the show. Gotcha. Yeah. So I think we've spoken a little bit enough, broadly about the concepts of it. Let's get a little bit more into the technicals and into the weeds. So let's do it, Dusty. Can you walk us through in a little bit more technical detail? Just kind of step by step, walk us through. So let's say you and I have a channel together, and we want to do a splice. Can you walk us through what that looks like?
Well, the first thing you do is you say STFU. Which is actually the first message sent over the wire. Funny backstory. Like there was a lot of discussion of how to splice a channel while it's being actively used, and it was determined it's just too complex. So we have to quiescence the channel, or basically make it silent for a little bit, like a second or two, right? We just need it to pause the channel in state. Don't process new payments. Just wait a couple seconds. And so there's a new message that's introduced to splicing they actually call it STFU, which stands for something fundamental is underway, I believe.
I like it.
Anyways, that's the first message. And then you go into you send a splice message. So the way Lightning nodes work is they're just constantly sending messages back and forth to each other. So splicing we add new messages to that protocol. So before we used to say add an HTLC, open, close, whatever. Now we have a new one that says, okay, I want to splice. And then we kind of declare our intentions. Like, I want to splice in this amount. I could splice out, might be worth backing up and saying you can splice in and out. We haven't really covered that. But yeah, let me just start there. So you have a channel with certain balance. You might want to make it bigger, in which case we do what we call splice in more funds to it. But you also might want to get smaller, which would be a splice out fund. So if we have if me and you have a 1 Bitcoin channel, because, we're balling, and I'm like, you know what, like, your channel's dead to me, or I don't know, I get mad, or whatever reason. I'm like, I don't want to close the channel, but I'm like, I don't trust you with the whole Bitcoin anymore. I can decrease the channel capacity to, like, say, half a Bitcoin and then take those funds out. That'd be a splice out. Or maybe I'm like, this guy's channel's up and coming. I'm excited about the future of it. I want to double that. Put 2 Bitcoin in there, so I can splice out. And one of the fun things is you could do both at the same time, right? So maybe, I got a channel with, who's a non-controversial figure? Somebody else. We won't name anybody. Somebody else. Yeah. And like, their channel is going to crap, but ours is good. I can splice out funds from their channel and put it into ours in one single transaction. And I think these kind of maneuvers are, there's infinite ways you could do them. There's the 3 most common are splice in, splice out, and cross splice between channels. But there's infinite possibilities. Sort of the point is that collaborative transactions allow you to do all kinds of multiple moves in one go.
One hit, yeah. And so I guess it's important to point out here that absent splicing, if you wanted to do this on your own, let's say in this example, we would otherwise have to do 2 transactions and be down for all that time. So as an example, if we didn't have splicing, we would otherwise have to, one of us close the channel, wait for it to confirm, make sure there's no justice transactions or anything else, then reopen the channel. So it's like, that's 2 on-chain transactions. Think about how much downtime the channel is. Whereas in this model with splicing is a much shorter downtime, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, closing a channel in theory could take like 2 weeks, depending on how many HTLCs you have, pending. And even if it doesn't take 2 weeks, you still have to wait for it to confirm on chain, plus a bunch of blocks for the justice transactions to monitor those. So with splicing, you can do it right away. And that's accomplished by, there was a lot of debate about this. If like splicing was kind of one of those, what do you call them? Like you'd ask a bunch of Lightning developers, like, how to do splicing? And you get like 20 answers and like all of them don't actually work for some reason, right? It's like, it's one of those problems that feels simple. And then you start go to the details. You're like, wait, actually this is complex AF, but the naive solution would be to, take the existing channel, splice. Let's just keep it simple. Do a splice in. We're going 1 Bitcoin and 2. We're doubling the capacity channel. We're splicing in. Easy to do is wait till that confirms. So we could STFU the channel, keep it quiet until the splice confirms, and then swap it over, right? But in Lightning, we generally use 6 blocks of confirmation, so call it, plus or minus an hour. That means your channel will be down for an hour or longer, right? Not processing payments. And like that actually would be very easy to implement. It would not be very challenging at all. But having your channel down for an hour is sort of like, it was a feature requirement, more or less. And that has led to this sort of, what you might call insane, but I think after like many, many years of the brightest minds in Lightning, pontificating on it, this appears to be the best solution. Sometimes you want the simplest solution possible, but if there is no simple solution, then you have to eliminate the simple ones first and then, refine the complex one. And the way the complex works essentially is you end up creating kind of 2 channels at the same time. So you have your existing channel sort of stays there. Then you have your splice channel, which is the modified channel, and you operate both in tandem and you duplicate everything. So if I send you a payment over this channel, internally the node is actually doing it on both channels. So we end up with 2 commit transactions, 2 sets of justice, 2 sets of HTLCs, everything that are just duplicated in both paths. And that way, if either thing confirms on chain, you still have all of the justice transaction stuff you need for either path. Does that make sense?
So we can think of it like, okay, so let me try and rewind a little bit. So every Lightning node, when we have a channel, we're maintaining our own state of that channel. And we also have a pre-signed transaction and our own set of pre-signed transactions to be able to broadcast if the other guy cheats you or goes offline or things like this, so that we can unilaterally exit, right? We can exit without asking permission. That's kind of part of the Lightning security model, let's say. And so what you're saying in this model with splicing, which is being implemented, is this idea that the nodes will duplicate the states and sort of keep both sets open, like the previous version and the spliced version of that channel. And so I guess the question then would be, what happens if there's routing that happens in that intermediary time? Or is it kind of blocked off while we're waiting?
Oh, well, in the naive solution, there would be no routing. But this technique allows us to do routing.
Gotcha.
The routing gets duplicated. So we just mimic it.
So you would have HDLCs on both sides of those two states. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Gotcha.
it gets kind of wild because you can RBF a splice. And you have to keep track of both the first splice and the second one. You could RBF it again, right? So you could end up with any number, like 10 of these.
And so then you're now having to maintain so many more possible states. Maybe it's a lot more computationally demanding, or maybe there's just a bit more risk being introduced now because there's so many different things all happening at once. You're kind of, some but then at the end, one of these gets confirmed in, right?
Yeah. Well, in theory, but also none of them could get confirmed, right? You could RBF 5 times, mempool rates go so high. So my first thought when thinking about it is just, hey, that's hard to code. But I love your points that you're adding complexity. That's true. And then you're adding computation costs. I think the computation cost is interesting to dive into because the main cost is generating extra signatures and storing them in your database, right? But the cost you experience is the same as your counterparty node does. So if one node wanted to try to DDoS you by making a ton of splices that never confirm, they have the same cost, right? So there's no the attacker and the attackee are getting the same amount of cost. That kind of net balances out. Among other things, why do you have a lightning channel with somebody who's trying to spam you? Get rid of them. But even if you don't, the costs are equivalent. The complexity risk is a real thing. I think that's part of why it's taken so long is people thinking through all of the ways you could possibly have your money stolen from this kind of fundamental change in the Lightning Network. And it's probably part of why it's taken so darn long. But all of this, the people that I say this way, the smartest minds in Lightning have thought about it a lot, and this is the net conclusion. That being said, it's still being released when it comes out. It's going to be released in experimental mode. It's going to be only use this if you're feeling reckless. We want some more time to really, test it. But I think theoretically we got all of the problems solved, and it should work just fine. But they still want this buffer phase of let's do a little more live testing to double make sure.
Gotcha. And so, what's the thought then if the splice transaction gets stuck somewhere in the transaction backlog? Let's say there's a big fee. Let's say there's a whole new round of, inscriptions hype, or there's a whole new adoption cycle happening. And, let's say we put in our splice and actually, you put it in, 30 sats a byte, and all of a sudden the mempool blows up to 300 sats a byte. What happens then?
You end up with the dual channel state forever, right? So philosophically, what does it mean to have two channel states? What we do in practice is we take all of the potential that what could be confirmed, or said more simply, transactions we've signed, we must assume could end up in the blockchain, even if they never do, because our counterparty might out of band give it to a miner, or who knows what, right? The fact that the fee rate's slow enough is not a guarantee that it won't get in. It could still get in, right? So we have to assume that. So we end up what we do when we calculate can we do a payment or not is we do the smaller balance of all of the candidates, right? So if we have one Bitcoin splicing and 2 Bitcoin, we'll never allow you to spend
more than the available amount. And even then, there might be some on my side, some on your side. Let's say there's 0.6 on your side and 0.4 on my side. Well, obviously, I can't route more than 0.4 to you because that's the maximum on my side anyway. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's enforced.
Yeah.
That's enforced in the current balance protocol of Lightning now, and it would that same logic applies now with the addition of the lowest of all splice candidates. So if we have 5 splice RBFs at once, we got to calculate the minimum balance for all of those. And
it really blows up a lot, hey. But I mean, at the end of the day, this could be seen as a tool for serious professional Lightning node routers, and maybe they would have access to use, as an example, a transaction accelerator. So maybe something's like stock, they would go to, let's say mempool.space comes out, well, they've announced a transaction accelerator or another one, and they just pay out a band because they're like, hey, I need to kind of deal with some complexity here. I'm just going to pay out a band to get it done, to kind of get it on chain. And then at that point, it's simplified, and now we're back to our normal Lightning channel state, I guess. Obviously, there's a fee associated for that, but maybe it's worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of maybe one of the running jokes is that like when we talk about how do we make Lightning work better on the mempool, it's like, oh, we'll just add an API to mempool.space. But you know, in reality, you probably want that option in your back pocket. If you had millions of dollars locked up in equivalent in Bitcoin locked up in your Lightning nodes, you probably want every option available. You don't really care about mempool philosophy. You're like, I just need to save my money if it's at risk, right? So I think it's the kind of thing where you want to do everything. Like in a certain sense, different features are competing with each other, but in a real sense, they're not. Like they're going to want every single tool in the toolbox. And that's definitely one of them. But It does remind me of, have you talked much about package relay or thought about it much?
Yeah, I think I did an episode with Gloria recently, but I know there's been sort of more advancements since then. I know she did a talk at BTC++ as well. But yeah, I mean, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, everyone in Lightning is very excited for that. If we can get that going, like our job gets a lot easier and also more secure and simpler and the nodes scale better. But that would eliminate a lot of the mempool problems. Like I think that the real problem today is that, if your transaction that you have to get through for some reason in Lightning, whether it be justice or commitment or whatever, if the fee is too low on it, you have no way of increasing the fee for a new mempool state. The only way you have is, of course, child pays for parent, which works as long as the first transaction has enough fee to stay in the mempool at all. If the minimum rate for the mempool is higher than that initial transaction, you're never getting that through unless you go out of bound, right? It's like currently without package relay, we need that mempool.space API, right? Which is part of where the jokes come from, unless we can get, package relay or something like that.
And I guess the kind of cruel part is, if you're in a scenario where the fee rate has just really shot up, now in order to replace it, to do some kind of RBF or CPFP in this case, you need to like pay for the the parent and the child,
right?
And like you're paying so much more fee.
100%.
Because that's what it takes to get it confirmed. And so, and there's all these like pinning rules. I spoke about that in an episode with Greg Sanders, Instagibbs. But as you said, there's kind of all this like complexity around it. Of course, the end user doesn't have to worry about this stuff, but developers and builders and entrepreneurs in the space do have to think about some of these things. But I mean, there are some pretty cool benefits as well. So I mean, I guess that's worth pointing out.
I think like long run, what we really want is set the fee at time of publication, right? Like we want to be able to like set it late, have like zero fee everything, and then add fees down the road for whatever the current mempool state is. That's the idea,
right? So this is like the zero fee anchors idea, right?
Exactly. And if we get to that state, then something else becomes possible. You could do a splice of a channel where you don't splice in or out. You don't change the channel balance at all. You just splice the channel into itself, and then pay a high fee and attach it to one of these previous anchors. And now you can literally use splices to fee bump other transactions, which I just think is wild.
Okay. Right. So it's like that's kind of a crazy idea to explain. So, yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't even be able to explain that in a simple way. I guess that means I don't know it well enough. But, I mean, I guess it's kind of like
it's a new idea.
Yeah, it's kind of like people have spoken about different ideas like transaction sponsors. I think that was a Jeremy Rubin idea. And there are kind of various ideas about how to deal with, congested states or more congested mempools, let's say. And so, yeah, I guess it's kind of you're opening up a collaborative transaction world or playground in a way that people can go and try to do collaborative work with.
I think the way to think of it is like there's a target of like net. If you had a target of like, how do we get net zero on-chain funds? How do we get them all into Lightning? The last problem you need is these fee bumps. Like everything else, okay, you can do everything else in the splice you do on-chain, except for these fee bump things, where after like, now you need a pile of money to fulfill the anchors, right? So it's like, how do we solve that last problem? It's like, oh wait, maybe splicing can be the fee bump. It's sort of the poor man's explanation of it. But it's a theoretical idea. It is technically possible today. But there's problems around like, if we add, pending UTXOs that aren't confirmed, that creates problems for splicing, which maybe we can fix, maybe we can't. But anyway, I think that actually gets solved by that there's a long conversation on whether that can work or not. And I think package relay actually solves that problem. So anyway, there's so many little things you wouldn't think are related to package relay. They just get magically fixed if we can get this wonderful thing.
Great. And so I know you've been you've been one of the main guys working on splicing. Can you tell us a little bit about where it's at with different Lightning implementations, right? Because it normally needs multiple implementations to agree and to implement an idea before it becomes accepted and is commonly used.
What's the saying? It'll be out in 2 weeks. TM.
That's the classic. Yeah.
It's the running joke, but actually, realistically, it might be 2 weeks, 2 to 4. The next Core Lightning release will have it. Knock on wood. Fingers crossed. In the next release, which is in I think about 4 weeks or so, 3-4 weeks. So you can round 2 weeks round up. I know Eclair, they have like a prototype version of it going, and apparently they have if you have a special version of the app that's secret, you can you can use splices in the Phoenix app, which I'm very excited to see. That sounds freaking awesome. I think it's like a prototypey, almost there, kind of works, but it's just inside from their node to their app. And the next step is getting it so it can interop with the rest of the network, which would be Core Lightning, right? So if we get Core Lightning and Eclair, get the interop going, then we got 2 major implementations that have it done. It officially gets entered into the spec, into I think it's both 2.7 and 9, something like that. And that should happen, it's a couple months, we're real close to it. The LDK is working on it, which is cool. And they announced a very ambitious timeline to get it done. And I know they're working hard. Those guys seem like they're working real hard. But it is a lot of work. I think one of the challenges with splicing is you sort of have to restructure your code base to lose the concept of a channel. Cause it's when you're writing the code, it's easy to be a channel is a channel between 2 peers. That's what a channel is. And Splice is what if it was this hybrid thing? And nobody wrote their code for channels not being real channels. Okay, I need 2 phantom channels that act as one. And so I suspect, without knowing, it requires a lot of refactoring of the code base over at LDK.
Interesting. Yeah, well, interesting. The term phantom channel. I guess that's this maintaining multiple states, right? The phantom channel, and one's the real channel, I guess.
Right. But which one's real depends on your perspective.
Getting really cosmic and hey man, this is not Tales from the Crypt. Come on, man. I'm joking. No, I'm joking. Yeah, cool. So that's really interesting to see. So yeah, as we were saying, we've got a toolbox. This is one tool in the toolbox. How do you see it comparing with some of the other ideas? What would the other main tools be? Is it loop out, loop in, circular rebalance, just close and reopen, channel chopping, I've heard it's called, just close and reopen?
Yeah, well, that's a big list. There's a bunch of them, right? I think the gold standard, if you can get it, is circular rebalance. That'll almost always be the cheapest. But I feel circular balance is this mythical beast that every Lightning node operator knows somebody who's circular balance, but nobody has done it themselves. You're who's actually ever pulled it off? And the story everyone has, I tried circular balance and it failed. It's it's kind of everybody. Circular balance is a dream, but if you can get it, always do that one first. And when it fails, which it will almost all the time, then you got to fall back. And I think the way to separate things like atomic swaps, loop, and peer swap and stuff is that splicing helps you manage your side of the channel's funds. So the funds that are yours, you can deal with in a very self-sovereign way, right? That's kind of one of the perks. You don't have to use a marketplace or trust anybody to manage your own funds. You can just do it directly yourself, self-sovereign. Now, if you want to manage the funds on the other side of a channel, that's where things get trickier, right? You have to this is actually somebody else's money and you're trying to move it around. Now you're going to have to go through some kind of service or atomic swap or peer swap or whatever to try to change those. Liquidity adds also an option. But if you're a Lightning operator, you probably want to have all of those services available to you and use the right one for a given moment. Probably one with the lowest fee most of the time. Yeah. But you do have things are those funds coming from a good connection, a well-connected node is another question. But to summarize it simply, if you're managing your funds, I believe splicing is the king. It's the way to do it. It'll be cheapest, fastest, self-sovereign, trust nobody. If you're dealing with somebody else's funds, then all the other tools make a lot of sense. And splicing doesn't even touch other funds. It has no impact on it whatsoever. So if you want to touch those, splicing is not for you. You got to look at some other tool.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to think about. But yeah, as you said, it's focused on, if you focus and think about your balance that's the part that splicing helps you the most, right? So even in that example, it's not just one Bitcoin channel between us. It's, let's say you've got 0.6 on your side and 0.4 on my side. It's your 0.6 that you can resize up or down, right? You might say,
exactly.
hey, I want to add 1 BTC to my side of the channel. So now it's 1.6 on your side and 0.4 on my side, like, as an example, right? Yep. And so then that's where you can really start to do things. And so I guess now, if we take this idea and apply that in the, let's say, the Phoenix user or the Breeze user, they may have their balance natively in Lightning, but now they've got they want to interact with a Neanderthal who's on chain and has no Lightning, right? They want to. They're like, guys. oh, you need on chain. I've got Lightning. Okay, well, that's where maybe they can start to do something like, okay, I've got this big balance in Lightning. I'll splice a chunk out of my Lightning balance and make that payment on chain. So maybe that's this kind of, and that's where we're getting to what we were saying earlier, this Lightning native wallet balance. And maybe, of course, maybe there'll be users who have like their life savings in the multi-sig on chain, nothing close to Lightning. But for their day-to-day spending, maybe they've got, a few $100 in their Lightning balance, and maybe they're splicing out a small chunk to make an on-chain payment, something like that, right?
Checking in savings, and also like if you have your savings on chain and you want to move it into your checking account, Lightning balance, you can use a splice to go the other way, right? And like maybe you get paid too much on Lightning, like your sandwich shop is taken off, and you got like, I have too much. I got like a whole Bitcoin on my Lightning channel, or something. It's too much. You can splice it out, put it into your cold savings.
So you could use this to periodically flush some of your balance out into your, say, your hardware wallet or your multi-sig, and flush some out that way to kind of lower your risk, because maybe you don't want to sit with that much hot, let's say, or that much in the Lightning balance, let's say.
Exactly. Yep. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, if I could go back, like the Moonwall guys, I didn't want to make it sound like critiquing them. They built that thing before splicing existed, right? So I think like trying to get unified balance wallets made without splicing is just it's difficult, and you have to make these trade-offs that are just uncomfortable. And with Moon, they made it so it always works, and you might pay a lot, but it'll always work, right? And I think that compromise made sense. And I hope to see Moon implementing splicing in the future. I think it makes total sense for them to switch their model over and, store it on Lightning native first and then move over to on-chain as needed.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I mean, certainly I did not intend any criticism of them. I think for me, it's more like you just have to know what tool you're using. And so for people who are really into Bitcoin, then we should take it on ourselves to advocate to our friends and family and think, okay, what's the use for this person? Do they need to spend more of their time on-chain or off-chain? And so maybe for some users today, you might say, hey, you know what? Moon makes more sense for some user who just wants to get off the exchange. Maybe Moon makes more sense there. But let's say you're talking to somebody who they want to spend and receive. Then maybe that's where you say, okay, maybe Phoenix Breeze or something like that. And, it really kind of depends what is that person trying to use, right? So, I think they're all great options. I've used them all. And those are just three, right? I'm sure there are many other Lightning wallets out there, but I think those are just a few ideas. Okay, so I guess that's kind of some of the main ideas around splicing. Do you have any other, setting splicing aside, is there anything else you're kind of looking at in Lightning, or just something you're interested in about Lightning?
Oh my God, I've been learning about Taproot stuff, and there's nonces everywhere with the whole music stuff. They're like, what's funny is there was Music 1. I just been studying this stuff, trying to keep up, Music 1 had 3 rounds. Music 2 has 2 rounds, right? How many rounds does Music 3 have? Hey, just making fun of the naming scheme, but no, Music's very cool. I feel like we've all kind of gotten used to signatures, how they work. It's like, okay, you have a nonce, you have your transaction, you sign it, send the signature, you're done. And Music is like, wait a second, no, you gotta send all these rounds of nonces around. And oh, by the way, if you leak one of these certain nonces, you lose all your funds, get your private key. It's like, okay, wait a second. I don't think we're used to developing where nonces are secret data on the same level as private keys, right? And so it's like, there's extra work around how do we store private keys. Now it's like, we gotta do that work to store nonces too. And you're like, oh God. That's stuff I'm working through. It's kind of fun, if I'm honest, but I think that has ramifications I'm excited about remote signing. I think the Holy Grail is like, you have your Lightning node running online on some server somewhere, but it doesn't have your keys. And your keys are like, plugged into the wall at home. And this is the step before the Holy Grail. This is like the silver to the gold or whatever. And that device decides which things to sign, right? So it's like, oh, okay, you're receiving funds? Great. I'll sign that. Signing funds? Wait, I need approval for that kind of thing. Right. I think that's generally called the VLS, and that's very exciting. But what I want to see is I want to do multi-sig with that, right? Like, I don't want one device in my home that could be stolen. I want 3 of them in different locations. They're like hard to find. Yeah. So, and have them all
there
three
is already,
sign.
For example, CK Bunker, which is like you can set up your cold card as kind of like a automated signing device, like a roll your own automated signer thing. So you could kind of do some of that. You can set policy rules like only spend this much Bitcoin within 1 day or within 1 week, things like that. So there's some of that, but that's an on-chain thing, not a Lightning thing.
Right.
So
I want that, but for Lightning, we want.
Right.
I feel like and I think like music enables these kinds of things that wasn't possible before. What's weird about it is like the Lightning channel itself is a 2 of 2 multi-sig, right? And so as their Lightning node, you're one of those 2. And if you want to then put multi-sig below that, now you have like hierarchical multi-sig, which is just wild, and like music enables us to do that for the first time ever. And it's like, I feel like we're in this like new like candy land of like new cryptography. We could do so much stuff. Let's like figure out all the things. And like it feels like a open greenfield land of opportunity of cool new ideas.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And then there's Frost as well. Like that's another whole thing.
And Roast.
Yeah, right. It's like a wrapper for Frost. There's so many crazy ideas out there. And then, I guess, have you looked into any of the competing L2 ideas, right? So I think this is one of those things where maybe another line of criticism. Now, obviously, again, you and I are probably Lightning promoters, right? Obviously. But there are some people saying, oh, hey, Bitcoiners are so focused on Lightning as the be-all, end-all. What about other layer 2 ideas or other things? Like, have you looked into any of that stuff, or do you just see it as like, no, Lightning is probably like really worth most of my focus, right?
I mean, somewhat, right? Like, I think like keeping up what's happening in Lightning takes a lot of time, if I'm honest. And I don't have a ton of capacity to dive into every other proposal, but I do tend to read them as they come through. And I think my general feeling is that like there's a lot of engineering work that's gone into Lightning. And it shows, right? There's like, okay, these things have worked. Not only do they work theoretically, they work in principle, and they've been tested over a long period of time. And I think like there are like areas of Lightning that are still areas of research that are worth like figuring out. Like, how do we get more than 2 people on a channel, for instance? Like, that's not a new idea. It's an old one. It's just like, wow, that's a complex problem. There's lots of trade-offs there, and we're just sort of not focused on it. And I think like proposals that are different ways of analyzing how to do that. Like, I don't even think they're not even competitors, right? It's like, we know that's a problem. Like, these goals can be combined together, right? If anything, it's like a kind of collaborative process. But, I think part of the challenge with trying to do what I would call a lot of proposals lately have been more than 2 people on a channel, right? That's sort of, whether that be, we have 5 on one channel, they're equal, or we have hierarchy or one's more important than others. Like, this is a general category of thing. One of the problems we have is that the way to implement it depends on which soft forks get through Bitcoin.
Yeah.
A lot. So like, it's a little bit like, do you want to spend forever developing something that then gets outdated by some new update to Bitcoin? And it kind of makes sense to sort of wait to see which soft forks win that battle, and then design around what the resulting thing is, particularly if we get some kind of covenant come through. Like, Lightning is obviously going to want to use that. But if we get no covenants, then, okay, we want to develop around that. And that's sort of a... Yeah.
And do you have any thoughts around covenants in general? Like, are you in favor of that kind of thing? Like, what's your broad view about covenants?
I mean, call me contrarian, but I'm like, what's the least popular covenant proposal? I don't want that one. Which is probably actually true. TX hash is probably one of the least... Oh,
that's Rusty's one. Yeah. Because I think there were different, I guess... There were different lines of argument. Some people were saying, oh, CTV doesn't do enough. And some people were saying, no, it's too scary. I don't want anything to do with that stuff. And then, there were competing ideas for it. And so I guess it's been a process of learning. And it's like those ideas are out there, but maybe not everyone had taken the time to really read into it and at least try and understand what's happening there.
Yeah.
And I think what's happened
Everybody's
now,
busy, you know.
yeah, and that's totally fair, right? And I think what's happened now is that because Barack has sort of come out and made a lot of noise about ARC, that's maybe in some ways opened the conversation again about things like any pair of hour, check template verify, and other ideas like checksig from stack and TX hash and things like this.
I have a prediction about all that.
Oh yeah,
I think like the nature of covenants is that there is no easy best option. There's so many trade-offs, and there's no clear like this is better than the others. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're fighting over covenants for like forever or a very long time. It's funny because like if there's a problem where there's clearly a best winner, then you can kind of argue it, right? But if it's all trade-offs, like there's no way to win if winning's even the concept here.
Yeah, maybe it'll be about who can prove out commercial demand, like who can prove out the most sort of real world use on, let's say, Liquid or Signet or something like that, and then maybe from that, people can then say, oh, look, see, there's all this demand, it's safe, etc. Now, not that there's a hurry, it's not like we're in a big rush, but we want to improve Bitcoin so that more people can self-custody and scale and so on. Or maybe the other idea is there's a lot of congestion on chain, right? Like maybe in a big bull cycle, there's all this congestion on chain and people are like, hey, we need something. And maybe that's what gets people the impetus to more seriously consider what to go with.
Yeah, these are good questions. I don't know. I think part of the reason I like TX hash is it's the most neutral. It's like, it's not saying this direction makes sense. It's like, we're going to start by supporting all possibilities of covenants, and then we'll have like flags we can turn off and on for the various ones we want. We do the implementation part now, turn all the flags off, and over time we can decide which flags to turn on. And it ends up being this kind of like compromise of like kind of saying, admitting we don't know what the future is, but we're down to build for it. And then, as more knowledge and more evidence and more experience happens, we'll just turn off and on the things that make sense. That feels more neutral to me, but I don't know. Yeah. I don't really have a horse in that race.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. It's fair enough. So yeah, look, let's summarize a few things we spoke about today. So obviously splicing is the big item. I think the high level idea is that you can resize your own channels, and particularly your balance in that channel. It's possible to use this to do collaborative transactions that may give users more privacy by undermining common input ownership heuristic and maybe others. It allows more efficiency at the wallet provider or LSP level, that maybe they can get more efficiency and then pass those savings on to users. And so we can consider this like another tool in the toolbox that Lightning users, whether they are end users or routing nodes and LSPs who might want to use this as part of their toolbox to manage their channel sizes by doing things without having to close and reopen. I guess that's my sort of high-level 1-minute summary. What do you think? Do you have anything to finish with? Yeah.
I love it. I feel like Splicing is one of those things, the gift that keeps giving. There's so many features, and I think you summarized it wonderfully. I think I'm just excited for the future in general. I think like Lightning is advancing in such cool ways. Splicing is one of them. There's many. I think like particular future I'm excited about right now is like Splicing and Taproot and how those could marriage together. What benefits are those going to get? But just let's go. Like, let's build shit. I'm ready.
Fantastic. All right. Well, listeners, make sure you follow Dusty. His Twitter handle is @Dusty_Daemon, and the site is lightningsplice.com. So links will be in the show notes. Dusty, thank you for joining me, and hope to chat soon.
Hey, thank you. See you next time.
You can get the show notes over at stephanlivera.com/490. Thanks, and I'll see you in the Citadels.